Thanks for tuning in to Wine Blast. Sign up to Wine Blast Plus for first-class subscriber-only content to access our full archive, support the show and get every episode before it goes on free release. You'll also get subscriber-only discounts with the likes of Corvin, Jancis Robinson Glassware and Academy du Vin Library. Just visit wineblast.co.uk or click the link in the show notes. Hello and a very warm welcome to Wine Blast. And in this one, we're getting our feet wet, at least metaphorically, because we are talking wine and water.
Well, at least we're not dry. That would be much worse, wouldn't it? Yes, in this episode, we're grappling with the tricky and contentious issue of water, the building block of life, vital for vines, but whose increasing scarcity due to climate change is causing existential level issues for wine producers. And this issue has come to a head lately, so an ideal time to dive in. Here's a taster of what's coming up.
People must start thinking today if they haven't done it before, because tomorrow is going to be too late. Viticulture will get smaller. There will be some natural selection.
South Africa has always been hardcore. 100% you can make phenomenal wine from irrigated vines. There's so many things that you can do, but it starts with soil. That's it.
So there we heard from Omri Ram from Lafleur, formerly Chateau Lafleur in Pomerol, Bordeaux, and South African viticulturist Jaco Engelbrecht. Two people at the cutting edge of this issue, as are Olivier Tregoat of Domaine Baron de Rothschild Lafite and Cornelis von Leven, who we're also going to be featuring. Hard to cram more water expertise into a single show.
We are packing a huge amount into this episode. It's a long one, so we need to get cracking. First, a quick recap on the basics. Vines are pretty hardy plants, but even they need some water to survive and grow grapes. To make the best wine, though, they can't have too much water. Moderate water stress means the vines focus their energies on the grapes, which in turn makes for better wine. Nor can they have too little water, though, because severe water stress means the vines shut down, which slows ripening, reducing wine quality in the way. It can even, in extreme cases, lead to vines dying. So it's a question of balance. Not too little, but neither too much. A Goldilocks measure, if you like.
How much water is just right depends on the climate, the vine variety, the soil and the way the vineyard is managed, the terroir, as the French would have it. For example, heavy clay soils tend to act like a sponge and hold on to water. Gravelly or sandy soils, on the other hand, have very low water holding capacity. A warmer climate means higher evapotranspiration. Some vine varieties, the so-called isohydric ones like Grenache, tolerate drought better than anisohydric ones like Merlot or Syrah. Widely spaced bush vines cope with water shortages better than densely planted, vertically trellised vines with a large canopy surface. Rootstocks also play a part.
Historically in Europe, vineyards thrived in places where there was just enough water from rainfall, but not too much. Bordeaux is a good example where soil studies back this up. Local wine appellations sprang up to protect these areas from malpractice and competition, instigating laws around things like which grape varieties could be grown, at what planting density, on what rootstocks, with what training method. And because there were fears about overproduction, irrigation was usually banned. So water for wine became taboo.
But now climate change has lobbed a giant spanner into the works. Increasingly higher summer temperatures and lower summer rainfall mean what was just enough is now often not enough. Some European wine authorities have started to modify their regulations and allow irrigation, for example in Spain, but outside the Languedoc-Roussillon, France has been notable in its reluctance to adopt any such measures.
Of course, irrigation has long been the norm in warm, arid regions. If you want a historic precedent, look no further than some of wine's most ancient heartlands of the Middle East, where archaeological research shows evidence of irrigation systems dating back millennia. More recently, efficient modern systems like drip irrigation through a network of pipes trained along trellis wires has become the norm in places like Chile, Argentina, Australia, New Zealand, the US, South Africa and beyond.
But within French wine heartlands like Bordeaux, irrigation has remained a dirty word. That is, until recently. It was the torrid heat of 2003 that started the whispers. Then increasingly frequent warm, dry conditions in vintages like 2009, 2010, 2016 and 2022 dialed up the heat in the kitchen. Finally, in August 2025 came a thunderbolt. One of Bordeaux's top producers, Chateau Lafleur in Pomerol, whose wines sell for up to 4 figures a bottle, neighbour to the likes of Petrus, announced it was quitting not only the prestigious Pomerol appellation, but also the Bordeaux appellation to become a lowly Vin de France. Why exactly? Water.
Well, not just water, as we'll come on to, but water or lack of it, and the appellation's reluctance to adapt was one of the main reasons behind Lafleur's move. In terms of impact, this was like Liverpool boycotting the Champions League, or, don't know, Donald Trump quitting social media. In other words, massive. It sent shockwaves rippling through the wine firmament.
And that's where the idea for this programme began. Firstly, we wanted to hear Lafleur's side of the story.
Yeah.
Beyond a carefully worded statement, the world has heard little from them since this momentous declaration. So why did they do it? And what are the implications?
But we also wanted to go further and use this as a starting point to explore the issue of water in wine more widely at what is clearly a critical juncture. Some people maintain irrigation is not compatible with fine, terroir-specific wine. Is that true? What are the options? If irrigation does become the norm, where will that water come from? And is this sustainable? In short, what is the future of wine when it comes to water?
Yeah, so let's start with Lafleur. It's owned by the Guinaudot family, who are well-respected vignerons. It's important to note that Lafleur, which has become one of Bordeaux's most celebrated and highly priced wines, is only a small part of the family's production. There's another acclaimed red, Les Pensées, made from different parts of the Lafleur vineyard. Les Perrières is sourced from a clay limestone vineyard near Maine on the Fronsac borders. And finally, the family own a working farm on the Ombo Plateau, northwest of Fronsac, which you visited actually, haven't you?
Yeah.
Where they make wines under the Grand Village and Champs Libre labels. They also have livestock, woodland, reservoirs and some cereal crops on that property.
Yeah. Now, I spoke to Omri Ram from Lafleur in March 2026, having allowed time for them to formally extricate themselves from the appellations and put in place all the new working practices, which was quite a bit of faff as far as I understand. It was also, ironically, after the heat and drought of 2025, a time when there'd been serious flooding in Bordeaux after a historically wet winter. It should be noted that some of the Lafleur terroir is particularly gravelly and stony with very low water holding capacity. I asked Omri what Lafleur meant when they'd said they were withdrawing from the appellations in order to, and I quote, face the reality of climate change.
Well, I think the realities are very clear. If anybody's still not on the program, it's very difficult to hide and play dead, as we say, because everybody feel it on a daily basis these days. We feel it in summer. We feel it more and more in winters, where winters are getting hotter. We feel it more and more in the extreme events in our daily life. Weather is becoming more and more erratic, more fires during summer, even sometime during spring, late spring, things that we haven't seen in the past. So I think climate is, changing in front of our face in a very intense way, and that's clear. We used to count, for example, during the season, the number of days that are above 32. That was 15 years ago. 10 years ago, we changed and we started counting days above 34. I can tell you that in the past 4 or 5 years, we've been counting days that are above 39, because having days above 32 is just very common during summer here at this date. And that's just one element, everything's changing in front of our face. And we either just close our eyes and, do this and say, yeah, all good, it's going to come back to normal. Or we react, we analyze, we understand what's happening, and we try to adapt ourselves the best we can.
And you are clearly not afraid to make those changes. Your announcement said, we change to remain the same. But obviously withdrawing from Pomerol and Bordeaux is a big step. What were you getting at there in saying we change to remain the same?
We make the wines of Lafleur. We make 6 wines, the wines of Lafleur. We have, there's a character. Our wines have a character. They have a feel that we would love to preserve, if possible. Yeah, our wines are always around that element that we call balance, a bit of elusive element, but it's all about balance. And the way we work in the vineyard matches that element of balance. We try to work in a balanced way to create balanced fruit, ending up with balanced wines. Now, our terroirs are changing, but don't forget that the soils are changing. If it's a month and a half of non-stop rain, which bring the soil to oversaturation, and therefore after that immediately, quite in a very strong way, a flip into sunny, rising temperatures, and suddenly this drying, very fast drying of the soils, which literally harm the structure of the soil, especially the clay soils. But more than that, we always forget to talk about the life in the soil. Yeah, we're talking about terroir. A big part of terroir are the microorganisms, or not just the macroorganisms also, but all the life in the soil. And those populations of bacteria, of yeast, of fungi, of earthworms, etc., they are getting the bad end of the stick from all of these changes. We are trying to see how we can remain the same, meaning try to preserve our terroirs. Yeah. And I think that's the key. We're trying to preserve our soils, preserve the environment of the vines, while they're undergoing an very aggressive attack from this extreme climate changes, I would say.
So because climate change is fundamentally changing your terroir, you are trying to adapt to make sure that you can still make great wines in your style at the end of it.
True. I think you nailed it in a nutshell. I don't need to say anything more. It's exactly what we're aiming for.
So the next question is obviously why now? Why 2025? Because obviously you've had hot years before. 2003 was hot. 2022 there was a derogation for irrigation allowed in Pomerol. Why 2025?
2025 for us is just it could have been 2022. Our thought process about this subject yields all the way back to 2003. Got its reinforcement massively in 2009, 2010. And pretty much from 2015 and on. Every vintage is quite crazy. And basically in Bordeaux, historically most years you don't need to irrigate. The historical problem of Bordeaux was usually too much water from the Atlantic. And we do have a lot of water in Bordeaux, meaning underground water, big rivers, the 2 famous ones, the Dordogne and the Garonne. Bordeaux is a land of water, basically. It's oceanic as a land of water. But as the climate is changing, things are changing, and we need to think about it. Today, in a general manner, if you look at a year, the civil year, water is still not a problem. In 2025, we had above 700 millimeters of rain in Lafleur. In theory, you can say that's enough. But as you clearly know where I'm heading to, the spread, the spread is an issue. In countries where they already irrigate vineyards, and it's something very normal, the spread of rainfall is mostly focused on winter, so about a month and a half to 2 months. In Bordeaux, it was not the case. We used to get spring storms, spring rain, then summer storms, the famous pluie salvatrice, which we used to say in French, the rain that saved everything in July, or more commonly in August. But we get systems from the Atlantic coming during summer, except that we see more and more summers and even springs where the amount of rain is just dropping drastically. And you can find yourself in 2025, we found ourselves with 3 months between 19th of May to 19th of August, pretty much. And we had 3 months with about 40 millimeters of rain, which is lower than 22. Couple that with peaks of heat that we haven't seen before. And when you couple the water stress plus the thermic or the heat stress on the vines, and you find yourself in a new situation. which has been developing, and we've seen glimpses of that maybe for some moments in 2016, in 2018, in 2020, definitely in 22. But getting that length of 3 months of summer with extreme drought and coupled with extreme heat, and then you say, okay, something gotta give. Oh, we gotta do something. And what gave, unfortunately, was vines. We're not talking about an effect of negatively impacting quality of the fruit of the vines, quantity of the yields. We are also adding another level to that. In 2025, we've seen vine mortality. Yeah, which kind of bring the message home, because you can always argue, okay, if I'm making less wine, in Lafleur was never a problem. Lafleur is naturally having the very poor terroir that we have, the very poor soils, very stony soils, and the old vines that we have in Lafleur. Producing low quantities was never an issue. We're quite used to that. That's our nature, let's call it. But accepting vine mortality, accepting your vines dying from the conditions, that's a new challenge. Yeah, and we're not ready to accept that.
So you had vines dying on the Lafleur vineyard?
In Lafleur vineyard, no, because we acted.
Right.
But we've seen in the vicinity and in general in Bordeaux, depending on the driest parts of Bordeaux, there were some parts of Bordeaux that were much more impacted by this combination of drought and heat than other parts of Bordeaux. I think in those parts, wherever there was no adequate reaction, it went to affect severely yields, quality, and in some cases, even vine mortality.
Okay. So how did you act, and specifically with regard to water?
So again, as I said, we've been thinking, analyzing, experimenting for a number of years, and basically we have a very simple, basic solution that, with time, of course, we evolved, we made it better. We took a harvesting machine that we never used because we harvest by hand, but we bought a second-hand one, and we modified it so we can carry water, drive in the vineyard. And now comes the most important thing, because you've mentioned, Peter, the word irrigation. In-house, we don't say irrigation. We correct soil water level. And I know that might seem like, wanky and fancy, whatever you want to call it. Basically, we're doing something simple. Instead of drip irrigation, which we pretty much, think when we say drip irrigation, we think of drip IV, intravenous drip for people. That's pretty much what you do with drip irrigation. And that's never what we sought to do. So what we decided to do is to adapt this, harvesting machine into carry water, to have a small tool in the front that open a small wedge in the soil down to 15 centimeter. And then automatically we give a dose of pretty much 10 liter per vine in the row. And then behind there's another tool that we close that little opening in the soil that we've done. So a few things to consider. When we do surface irrigation, most of the water are lost into evaporation, because usually when we need to irrigate, these are times when there's heat and drought. Yeah. So the atmosphere is demanding a lot. We're losing most of it. So we want to irrigate inside the soil and close immediately behind it. Of course, when we can do that at night, great, we're even better. And we did a lot of that at night. So I think this process is already eliminating one of the major problems. But the most important was, we don't want to make it available immediately for the vines. We want to give it to the soil, as it usually works in natural processes with a summer storm or just a normal rain. And the soil will negotiate with the vine, and they do whatever they do usually between them. And we saw beautiful results with that. Our fear was that we're going to overdose the vines, which could happen. You can make those vines fat and lazy, which is the last thing we want to do. We want to give them the minimum necessary so they can continue to cope with whatever the season, with whatever nature throws at them. And that's our idea. So again, we correct the soil. And last thing about that, and I hope I'm not going too far, but I've mentioned before, climate change is impacting not just our vines and their cycle, it's impacting the soils and the life of microorganisms in soil, so the health of the soil. by correcting soil water, not irrigating the vines, but correcting soil water, we are helping the soils go through these very, very tough moments and preserve the life in the soil, the population of the microorganisms and the insects. So I think that's something that we're definitely taking in consideration when we decided to go with this process.
But it's really interesting. You have been doing a fair amount of research. You're interested in the data as well as the practical hands-on farming experience and the results of that, of course. Are there any other sort of insights you can share with us of what this is showing you in terms of the vines and then the wines?
I have to say for the wines, it's a very early days because 2025, that's what we applied. Those wines have been just blended in January because we blend early. But it's really, really, really early days to say. They taste amazing. And our alcohol levels and the balance of the wine, because alcohol level on its own doesn't really, we don't care much about it. Numbers are very deceiving, as we said. Data could be deceiving with no context. The balance that we have in those very, very baby wines that are just now in barrels and coming from a very extreme year, a very extreme season, what we find in those very young wines is beautiful balance, beautiful aromatics, freshness, energy, without missing any body to hold all of these things. So I think the result is exactly what we wanted, meaning we wanted those to maintain this style of wine, and we managed. And with the application of correcting the soil water level. So I think we're very happy about that.
How many times, for example, did you have to do this soil correction in 2025?
We've only irrigated our poorest, most stony soils. That means that we only irrigated a proportion of Chateau Lafleur. We did not irrigate in Grand Village where we have a lot of clay that managed to retain more water during that difficult time. We did not irrigate in Le Perrier when we have clay on very unique type of limestone that can actually send water by capillarity up when needed. The only place we needed to irrigate or to correct soil water level is some parts of Lafleur which are extremely abundant with big stones, and therefore there's almost no soil there. And your retention or water retention capacity is just ridiculous. So yeah, so this actual surface that we had to intervene with correcting the soil is actually very small. And even inside that surface that we define in Lafleur, not, every 10 or 15 meters when you move to one direction, the soil composition changes. So some places we had to pass 5 times during the season. We're talking about end of May or early June and until some point in August, I would say mid-August. That's the relevant season for water correction. And in that season, we pass in the most needy, most poor soils, poor terroirs area 5 times. In the less needy, we pass 1 time.
The real question here is irrigation, water, soil recharge, as you put it, is that compatible with fine wine production?
We believe it's totally compatible in viticulture anywhere on the planet. From base wine, from more mass production, all the way to the top fine wine, farmers are correcting their soils when needed. The only thing that people, in a very weird way for me, in France, look at it and frown upon is water, which is the most natural element you can have in your soil. For some reason, water is a taboo in France. Water in vineyard, by the way, not in anything else. So I think the question is not about, is it okay or not to irrigate? Case by case, of course. The real question is how, if we choose to irrigate, how we do it properly, how we do it with respect to the surroundings, to the soil, to the environment, to the people, to the plants. So that's for me the only question.
Just a very quick question. If Pomerol and Bordeaux changed the rules, would you go back in?
Maybe. I don't have a good answer for you. For once, I don't have a good answer. We never shut the door behind. We're in very good terms with the bodies of the appellation of Bordeaux and Pomerol, both these bodies. We're very good terms with everybody. We're very good terms with our neighbors. I think that's even more important for us because we are in Pomerol. Doesn't matter if we live in the appellation, if you won't see the name Pomerol on our labels anymore. We are in Pomerol. We are in Fronsac, in the Grand Village side, and that will never change. So if the regulation will change and will adapt and will become more reasonable to a level that we find that could be interesting to come back, maybe, but I'm not sure I see the point why to do that. I think that appellations were an amazing tool. I think it's one of the main reasons why French wine succeeded so well, historically speaking, and today is still, I think, dominating the dome of fine wines. But like everything, that is working well, and then you don't touch it for 50 or 70 or 100 years, don't expect it to continue working well. One thing we can be sure of in life is change. Change is inevitable, and we can't close our eyes. So I think the appellations will adapt. Some appellations, by the way, around France are extremely dynamic and are adapting as we speak and before. And I think there's less issues over there. Some appellations are less reactive. I think in the end, appellations will adapt or will die, like everything on this planet. Yeah.
Final question. How will the leading wine producers of the future manage the issue of water for vineyards?
That's a good question. I think it will depend a lot on who you are and where you are. I think those wine growers want to manage it well. They should start, if they haven't started thinking already a few years ago, they must start today, not a minute later. They must start today thinking about their situation, where they are, where the vineyards are located, what's available around them. So I think people must start, thinking today if they haven't done it before, because tomorrow is going to be too late. And I do believe that, agriculture, and let's focus about viticulture. Viticulture will get smaller in surface. I'm sure of that. There will be some natural selection. We know today that there is too much wine being produced. I've seen every day driving from Bordeaux to Fronsac to Pomerol, a parcel at least a day that was still standing yesterday and was, a bunch of dead vines on each other after being uprooted, waiting to be burned. So the vineyard is being reduced as we speak, and I think it's a process that's going to continue. We don't need so much wine. What we do need is good or better wine, and I think that's a process we're going to. So the needs of the sector will be reduced because of that process. There will be less vineyard, but I think those vineyards that will remain, the people who are managing them must be on top of the game. They must understand how to use water, where water should come from, which water they should never touch, and how to anticipate. Meaning, the fact that you found a good solution for today and for the next 5 years doesn't mean that you have a good solution for the next 15, 20, or 50 years. So keep asking yourself questions. Never be comfortable. Never lay on the laurels, as we say. I think that's the base assumption in Lafleur, that, nothing is stable. Everything is moving. We can't get comfortable.
Omri, thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure.
Squeaky bum time then. No getting comfortable.
No.
Wine producers need to adapt, need to plan for change, and some won't make it.
Yeah, there's a lot to ponder. Climate changing, terroirs changing. Omri actually said to me, soils are dying, terroirs are dying, and people are oblivious. So, serious stuff. And clearly, to their mind, the authorities are not adapting fast enough. And apparently, when they made their announcement, the first messages they received were from South Africa, Australia and California saying, bravo, But what took you so long?
Yeah, but clearly they'd been thinking about it for a while, since 2003,
Yeah.
from what Omri said.
Yeah.
You wonder how many others are thinking the same thing. You'd imagine a fair few, no?
Yeah, absolutely.
But then not everyone has soils with as low water holding capacity as those gravelly Lafleur plots.
Yeah.
And not everyone has extra land they can use to gather and store water like the Guineados.
I think that's a really key point. Really key point. I also talked to Omri about where their water's coming from at some length, which is why we couldn't get it in. He was adamant they wouldn't use 1 milliliter of tap water because that, in his words, would be the demise of us all. That said, it's important to say not everyone is as scrupulous as that.
No.
It should be noted. Omri said, we have enough water in Bordeaux. It's just about effective capture and storage, both from rainfall and from the occasional overflows from the Dordogne River, which is close to them. So they've got reservoirs in Grand Village. They've also dug a well, 142-metre deep well. But he said that will contribute a negligible amount. Plus, that kind of water extraction is monitored and inspected quite carefully by the authorities.
Yeah, I mean, he was also at pains to stress their water usage is minimal, wasn't he? Just enough to allow the vines to continue their cycle.
Yeah.
For example, they apparently use on one vine during an entire season what an average tourist in southwest France consumes in 3 hours. But we should also add that water was only one factor in them leaving the appellations. They're keen to try things like mulching and shadowing techniques and reducing plant density, none of which is currently allowed.
But some of which we're going to come back onto in a
will,
bit.
we will.
So a lot to take on board there. Let's take a breath before coming back for more. To recap so far, climate change is forcing wine producers to adapt. Water and irrigation are key issues, but many European wine appellations forbid it. Lafleur recently opened a Pandora's box when it sensationally quit the Pomerol and Bordeaux appellations, in part to be able to give their vines water during the hot, dry summer of 2025. The results for the wine appear to be positive, but as for the wider implications, that remains to be seen.
So the question is, could this prove a turning point? What does the future hold? To answer these questions, we turned to Olivier Tregoat, winemaker and agronomist, expert with a PhD on the impact of soils on grapes and wine, who's worked all around the world and is now with Domaine Baron de Rothschild, or DBR, particularly overseeing Chateau L'Evangile in Pomerol and Riersec in Sauternes.
Now, Olivier is used to irrigation, having used it in Chile, Argentina, and also in the Languedoc, where DBR have Domaine d'Ossière in Corbière. He talks about soil being essentially a reservoir. And for example, in the classic gravels of Lafite or L'Evangile, the water holding capacity is around 80 to 120 millimetres, but the vines will need a minimum of 300 to 350 millimetres during the growing season, hence around 3 rains per season will be needed to give normal yields. In this interview, we talk about appellations, or AOP, as he also refers to them. I asked Olivier how things are changing.
In comparison with the 80s and the 90s, today we pick the grapes close to 1 month earlier than before. For example, today in Chateau Riersec, we produce R of Riersec, a dry white wine, and the last vintages we picked in 2020 or 22, we picked in August. It was not the case 20 or 30 years ago. We picked mid-September or end September. If you have also a look on this data, we have to understand that according to the global warming in the world, the speed of this global warming is twice in Europe in comparison with other parts of the world. For example, the global warming in Bordeaux is really faster in comparison with Argentina or Chile, for example. And that's why today we have more temperature and less water during the season. I also can take another example. In Pomerol appellation, the average rainfall between July to August on these 2 summer months between 2005 to 2015, it was 100 to 120 millimeters. Between 2015 to 2025, it is 50 to 60. We have lost close to 50 of millimeter of rainfall during our summer today.
So given these changes, should Bordeaux and Bordeaux appellations be considering allowing irrigation?
It's a good question. I'm not sure I've got a good answer, and I've got some doubt to answer, honestly. First of all, before to speak to irrigation, I think we have to speak about the rules of our appellation. I mean, before to use water, do we have to modify our way of to grow our vines in this location? I mean, take the example of the density plantings. Today, we have mainly in Pomerol 7,000 plants per hectare, maybe a bit less or a bit more. Is this density plantation is still the right one? I'm not sure of that. Why? Because the density plantation means you have a competition between plants, so a competition of water, and especially on these soils with very low holding capacity, it's an issue. And also we use some rootstocks with very low vigor, but today probably the rootstock we use in Bordeaux are not the right one. For example, in Spain or in south of France, in Château d'Aussière, in our property, we use some Gravzac, or we use some 110R, or we use some 1103 pulse, and it's that. So I mean, before to go on this this debate of the using of water, I think we have to also consider all the model, all the system. And we are on the way in Château l'Évangile, for example. Last year we have planted 1 hectare of Cabernet Sauvignon with 110 ha on a very shallow, gravelly soil to prepare the future. So we have many things to do, but it takes time, sure. And sometimes people are focusing on that, but that's true also that on the gravelly soil, if you have 2 months without any water, even you modify this system, you have some strain. It's difficult for the vines to reach and to feed the grapes. So probably, I take the example of 25. 25 in Bordeaux area, this is probably one of the most dry. It's less hot in comparison with Bordeaux, and there is less thermal stress rather than in 22, but there is more water stress because we add 38, if I remember well, millimeter during 2 months. But sure, if 25 will be the norm tomorrow in terms of climate, in terms of vintage, probably step by step we have to really thought about it. But the first step, as I mentioned, we have to reconsider the model of production. And after, we can also, in the same time, I would say, we have to consider the in the future, probably it would be necessary, I don't know, in 10 years or 20 years, I don't know.
It will be necessary to allow irrigation.
Probably we will see. I don't know today. I'm not a dogmatic guy. I'm trying to be a pragmatic. First of all, we have to be honest. We have to be clear about the situation. Do we have a water stress in Bordeaux? Do we have a problem of water stress? For me, the answer is yes. Yes, and probably more and more. If I have a look on the data, on the climatic data, sure, we have a strong tendency of global warming. It means the higher temperature and less rainfall during the summer. That's pretty sure. After, the second step is, yes, we need to modify our way to manage the vineyard for tomorrow. That's pretty sure. So that's why, for example, now for 10 years in the right bank of Bordeaux, I'm pretty sure that properties are planted Cabernet Sauvignon or Cabernet Franc. These varieties, especially the Cabernet Sauvignon, is really a good variety because the regulation of its transpiration is really better than in Merlot. We have some index, scientific index. In English, we call this the water use efficiency. The water use efficiency of Cabernet Sauvignon is really high in comparison with the Merlot. So for sure, Cabernet Sauvignon is more adapted to water stress. That's why also we produce very good Cabernet Sauvignon in Chile, in Napa for sure, in Australia too, etc., etc. With Merlot, it's more complicated. The water consumption is higher, and the regulation of its transpiration by stomata is not so good. So, in the right bank today, we saw many plantations of Cabernet Franc or Cabernet Sauvignon, but less and less Merlot. I can imagine Château l'Évangile in for the next generation in 30 years. Today we have 80% of Merlot, 20% of Cabernet Sauvignon. Tomorrow in 20 years, probably it will be reverse or 50-50 or something like that. So we have to focus on that. We have to focus on the trellising system. We have to focus on the leaf area. On the last point, we need to bring some water. Which water? Where and how? And I think we have to open that to open that discussion. It's not to have the permission for tomorrow. It's just to try to anticipate the future.
Now, you've seen wine production all over the world. I'm going to ask you two questions now. Firstly, is irrigation compatible with fine wine production? And then secondly, if so, how? How is it best to do it? Of course, it will be locally, or maybe you could give us an example, but how can irrigation be compatible with fine wine production?
I think we can really produce fine wines with irrigation. In Chile, in Napa, in Argentina, for sure. If you really manage the way of irrigation, I mean, to bring the right quantity at the right moment, you can really fine-tune your water status and create a height of growth in veraison, the perfect moderate water status to produce very good berry size with very high sugar content, anthocyanin contents, tannin contents, and you produce very good wine. So if you manage irrigation, for example, like we do in Chile, we use some tools to do it with, we have different tools. We use some tools with humidity soil probe to understand how we refill the soil with water. But we also use directly physiology indicators like sap flow sensors or chamber pressure to measure very precisely the water status. With this kind of tools, we are more sure to bring the good quality, the good quantity on the right moments to bring some water.
Now, in terms of water use and irrigation, some experts say it's very difficult once you have irrigation to remain at the right level of water deficit, and that, once producers have access to irrigation water, they're tempted to take too much advantage of irrigation. What do you think of that?
This is the human nature. This is human nature, sure. I understand your question. That's why also the appellation has got a responsibility to explain that, to be sure that we do not need to increase the yield. We are in a plenty problem. We have many problems of too much wine on the market today. There is our main issue today is the world consumption, that this consumption is decreased too much. So we need to have some control of that. Sure, definitely. I am for the control, definitely. We need to control the water consumption of an estate. We need to have, we have a water police in France, or environmental water police in France. So we have to explain the tools we have to use to control the water, but also we have to be clear, and we have to be able to give some penalties on the properties that tomorrow didn't respect the rules.
I mean, you talk about the issues, the challenges around wine consumption. Wine consumption is falling around the world. Do you think, given the problems around water, around climate change, and around consumption, do you think ultimately the world vineyard will just have to shrink a bit and wine production will have to reduce a bit in order to adapt to all these things, including the challenge of water?
But necessarily, I think all the countries all over the world today, all the country is now pulling vines. Our main challenge today for the viticulture, this is the consumption, the worldwide consumption, especially the red. We know a very good example or very good sentence is that 50% of the red on the world market are consumed by the people that are more than 55 years old. So naturally, we will reduce our vineyard.
Olivier, how will the leading wine producers of the future manage the issue of water for wine?
It's complicated. Honestly, it's complicated. First of all, we need a diagnostic, a serious scientific diagnostic about the water status, where on the scale of the limited water status, where I am in moderate water status, I am in serious limited water status, or I'm in stress water status. First, so diagnostic. Secondly, how I can adapt my vineyard for tomorrow before to think about water. Okay, so this is also in relation by the rules of AOP in general, so density plantation, leaf area, rootstock, grape variety, etc., etc. This is one of the for me the second step. And the third step, if do that, it's not enough, because finally, even I try to modify my layout, the system, it's not sufficient. But probably I have to open the discussion about water resources. And water resources means locally, do I have opportunities to use water with no competition with human population, with other activities there, etc. So step by step, we have to open this gradually, I would say. Not dogmatic, but with data, I would say.
Olivier, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much.
So first, data-led diagnostics about soil-water status, then looking to adjust things like planting density, rootstock, grape varieties. Interesting his prediction that Cabernet Sauvignon will start to colonise the right bank of Bordeaux, which is, of course, historically the heartland of Merlot.
Yeah, and before too long, yeah.
And then, only as a final resort, looking to irrigate.
Yeah. But for him, as a soil expert, as a highly experienced viticulturist and winemaker and a Bordeaux insider, he's accepting the likelihood that this will happen in Bordeaux, which is, I think, a pretty big mindset shift from even 10, 20 years ago. He drew the comparison with Languedoc when we talked. Obviously, a warmer, more Mediterranean region where DBR have Domaine d'Ossière. And he said Languedoc used to be anti-irrigation. Now it's pro. And you could see Bordeaux going the same way. especially given that climate change in France seems to be following the worst case scenario.
Worryingly, he did also note how not being able to irrigate in parts of the Languedoc and Roussillon might lead to desertification and forced population migration, given how important the wine sector is as an employer in the region, which is clearly a worst case scenario, but one I guess to bear in mind.
Yeah. But he said, France, including Bordeaux, does have the water available. He gave us some stats that something like 70% of water use in France is for irrigating agriculture, but vines account for 0.3% of that 70%. He said that only 5% of the Rhone River's volume is currently extracted, and said the Dordogne River could easily be tapped in the context of Bordeaux. Rhone was more for sort of Languedoc and Roussillon potentially, but Dordogne, in Bordeaux is usable. They wouldn't need huge amounts. He added that in his view, neither aquifers nor drinking water should be on the table for irrigation use, and every decision should be made locally.
Now, one other expert we checked in with was Cornelis von Leven, another leading light in soil and water, professor of viticulture at Bordeaux University, much cited researcher, consultant to Cheval Blanc no less. Like Olivier, he's not anti-irrigation, saying it can be compatible with fine wine production, but his key point was the following, that there's a risk of over-irrigation once people have the ability to do it, because it becomes the default solution when other options should be considered first.
Yeah, he wrote a really interesting piece in a Bordeaux magazine, which we'll link to in our show notes if we can, but essentially saying that irrigation should not be allowed in Bordeaux simply to cater for the small amount of terroir that are now proving too dry in some seasons. He says growers instead should adapt by other means, for instance, changing rootstocks or planting density or grape variety or training method.
He also pointed to what he described as an ecological disaster taking place in La Mancha, Spain. According to a recent paper he sent us, and which we'll put in the show notes as well, in recent years aquifers have been tapped to the tune of something like 1 trillion litres to irrigate vines. And then what happens is that sometimes the wine can't be sold in what is a saturated market, and the wine is subsidised to be distilled, which all seems like complete madness.
He concluded by saying that we need to produce less wine, but better quality, and sell this wine for higher prices. We just need to use the wisdom of the smart people in the Mediterranean from previous centuries. He specified he wasn't talking crazy prices, just enough to be profitable, like, €10 rather than €2.99 or something like that.
Okay, so talking of wisdom and dry places, we wanted to finish up by getting an insight from somewhere completely different, South Africa. Water shortages have been so severe in the Western Cape lately that during the 2015 to 2018 drought, Cape Town faced the looming threat of day zero, when the city would literally run out of water. And yet, dry farmed vines continue to flourish in regions like Swartland. So what's the story?
Now, I talked to Jaco Engelbrecht, who works with a stellar client list from Eben Sadi to Duncan Savage, Adi Badenhorst and more, who's so dedicated to his métier that he describes himself as a psycho-viticulturist. He uses sensors and data and mapping to great effect, but never underestimates being in the vineyard. He works with both dry farmed and irrigated vineyards in South Africa as well as abroad. And following a particularly dry 2026 vintage, I asked him what he's been seeing lately.
In South Africa specifically, it's a strange thing. We have this conversation quite often that South Australia and South Africa has always been hardcore. So we do see drought spells. What we do see changing is we're going to more erratic rainfall patterns. So water management, especially in the Swartland and Paarl regions where I also work, is absolutely crucial.
Yeah, so talk us through that a little bit more in relation to South Africa. Things have been pretty gnarly recently in the last decade or so. Cape Town's nearly run out of water. There's so many things going on. Tell us what the situation is like there, and talk to us a little bit about what water management you're doing to try to cope with it.
Okay, so with Cape Town running out of water, we can't get into politics because I don't see any infrastructure enlargement, but the Western Cape is getting millions of people every every year more, especially in the Drakenstein area where I am. So let's leave politics out of this. What we can do in viticulture is the 2017-2018 we had a massive drought, like the worst I've seen. And the repercussion of that drought was still evident for like 5-6 years after that, still till today. These old vines died. That actually forced us to look at things seriously, to look like how can we do this? I mean, in South Africa, cover cropping has been a big thing forever. It's fascinating, the research that's been done on cover crops, and it's regional. So it's not just a broad-based thing, it's actually regional. So mulching, protecting soil moisture, protecting evapotranspiration, and especially in the Swartland and Paarl, we're very fortunate that we are in a predominantly wheat-growing area. So the resources are available. So we mulch around the vines as much as we possibly can. It's obviously very expensive. It's labor intensive. But I mean, you can ask the guys in the Swartland, there's just no replacement for that. I mean, because also while you're not just protecting like surface evapotranspiration, surface temperature fluctuations, but you also, that breaks down into carbon. It breaks down into nutrients. So you have to refill that every 3 years. You have to repack more straw, but it's not something that just blows away in the air. It actually gets broken down and actually feeds the plant. So it's a continual thing, or a continuous thing that we'll be doing, and we have been doing for decades. I mean, I think we just really ramped it up after 2017-2018 drought. And then cover cropping. So we've been focusing on really building carbon. We are in a carbon scarce area in our soils. If I look at the carbon percentages in the Northern Rhone, for instance, I mean, it's stuff that we can only dream about. But we were at the bottom, so with our soil carbon, and we know how important it is to build it. And I think that's the one thing that Europe, especially France, needs to come and learn. Like, everybody goes to just Australia or America. I see very, very little French companies come out to South Africa in wintertime to come and see how we do it. So, I think we've really focused on managing our soil with cover crops and mulching. That's been the main driver.
You know, we're talking about you work with both dry farmed vineyards and irrigated vineyards. So
correct.
Let's focus on dry farmed initially. Which, you know, what are you doing there beyond, let's say, cover crops and mulching to ensure proper water management?
Well, planting varieties that are isohydric, Grenache Blanc, things that can take the punch. I mean, I know I'll get hit over the fingers for saying it, but I mean, I think Swartland is not a very, very popular place to grow Syrah in future. There's definitely pockets. I mean, look at Porceleinberg and the Malinius as well, but that's specific pockets. Syrah is an anisohydric variety. It struggles to manage water. So, but if you look at the plantings in the Swartland, the biggest plantings, it's mainly Chenin Blanc, Grenache Blanc, Grenache Noir, Cinsault. It's the varieties that's shown that we can take the punch. I mean, Palomino, I don't know where that thing comes from. It must come from the moon. It's not from Spain or wherever. Because in the 2017-18 droughts, it looked like they got irrigation water. Like, I don't know where they got it from, but Palomino is he'll go to war with you. So we definitely have, in the past 10 years, I've looked at different varieties and testing them out as a holistic approach of looking at it. Because beyond mulching and cover cropping and looking at varieties that can take the punch, it's not a lot we can do. Obviously, planting bush vines, we do like thin out the crop, etc. But that's as far as you can go. I mean, if it doesn't rain for 3 months and 4 months in the growing season, it doesn't rain. So you have to protect what you have.
I mean, a simplistic question, I know, please forgive it, but do you think dry farming makes for better wine?
No, not necessarily. I think I'm not a dogmatic guy when it comes to organics or watering, etc. I mean, there's a lot of people that feel super strong about it. I think there's balance. If you find the balance in it, I think you can make phenomenal wines.
What other levers can you use to make sure that you're using water responsibly and minimally, but adequately?
Don't overcrop. Don't grow too big a canopies. Trellised vineyards tend to have larger canopies. So you won't find a lot of dry farm trellised vineyards in South Africa. Regulating crop. I mean, we'd love to have more crops. It's not like we think it's fancy to have lower crops or lower yields, because low yields means less income. So yeah, it's smaller canopies and soil management. That's the game.
You've touched on profitability there, which I think is vital. Obviously, reducing yield means you can reduce your water inputs and manage water responsibly. But, wine still needs to be sustainable economically. And there's the challenge, because presumably, therefore, if you're reducing your yield, you need to raise your price to make it work. Is that sustainable? Is it manageable?
I think we're constantly looking for ways to be more sustainable. So how do we do that? In older vineyards, we are constantly looking at vines that underproduce or underdeliver, and we will replace them with younger, stronger vines. Rootstocks play a massive role in soil water management in South Africa. The Richter 99 is the king of drought resistance. Richter 110 is good. So we're very blessed with good rootstocks that can take the punch, like Richters, or it's unmatched.
Switching to irrigation now, a very bold question to kick off with, but is irrigation compatible with terroir-specific fine wine production? Can you irrigate and make fine wine, I suppose, is the question.
100%. I believe so. 100%. I think there's more than enough examples in the world that where people irrigate. I mean, 100% you can make phenomenal wine from irrigated vines. It's how you manage it. It's a management system like anything in the world. Balance, and if you go too much, it's going to be bad. That's it.
So then the question to you as the viticulturist is how you get it right in any particular site. How do you know, or how do you work out how to manage that irrigation correctly to maximise quality?
I think if you think there's a single silver bullet, then you're a fool. We have so many tools. I mean, I use NDVIs. We use continuous loggers. We dig a hole and see what's going on. You have to be there. You look at the tendrils. You have to know the soil. So you have to do proper profiling. Like, what is the permeability of the soil? What is the water holding capacity? What's your carbon? Because carbon is a small molecule but a huge reactive surface. So it holds on to water and nutrients a lot better. So what's your carbon content? That's why we focus so much on building carbon with cover crops in the Swartland, because if we can raise our carbon, we will also raise the adsorption of water. So there's various things that we use. I mean, ultimately you have to know your site. That's the thing. I mean, you have to know what the capability of your soils are, weather stations, monitoring rainfall. Because looking at rainfall for a year is a senseless exercise. It's about the spreading of rain. Like, when did we get rain? How much did we get? And then that's where the probes work very, very well. Because you think, we had 30 mils of rain. It was great. And then when you look at the probe, you're like, oh, my word. It didn't even penetrate to like 50 centimeters. So then when there's heat after that like evapotranspirates within a week. So you have to use the tools, and there's so many tools that's available that you can use.
And how is climate change affecting the water issue in South Africa particularly?
A lot of farmers around here are reliant on water schemes, being pumped from water schemes. And unfortunately, in a drought, farmers get cut off first. So it's like I said, I mean, I can't go into politics. I don't want to go into politics. But I mean, if we don't increase the amount of dams, like proper dams, or the collection surfaces, I don't see it getting better in future. Hence why we are planting, when we're doing new plantings, especially if we have a little bit of a curvature, we plant on contours in order to harvest any rain that we can into dams. I mean, even if we don't irrigate, it doesn't matter. Like, we try to get as much as possible first into the soil and then properly transferred into dams. So I don't know. I can't answer. I mean, it's some years are good and some years aren't. I mean, there's it was dry in the 70s as well. So we see these cycles that may be a bit more erratic now. But I mean, we try and mitigate them with, like I said, I mean, managing soil that's number one.
Yeah, final question, Jaco. How will the leading wine producers of the future manage the issue of water for wine? What's the future for wine when it comes to water?
Definitely, you have to plant the varieties that is at home in that place. Like, I mean, it's no use you go to an area where you know that there's no water, there's low rainfall during the summer months, and you go and plant Syrah there, like trellis. I mean, it's stupid. Like, so I think regionality with regards to varieties is going to become a big thing. I mean, Grenaches are amazing in South Africa. Chenin Blancs. Chenin has just always been, I don't know where that guy comes from. Maybe even Palomino, like, grew up in the same hood because they're both super tough. So I see a lot of guys planting that. And then I don't think it's going to be a massively commercial, but field blends. I think field blends mitigate seasonal variation fantastically. If you can plant a white field blend with a bit of Grenache Blanc, a bit of Macabeo, majority of Chenin Blanc, maybe a little bit of Petit Manseng for acidity, a bit of Colombard for acidity, and a bit of production. And in some seasons, one variety will do better than the other. But I mean, as a group, they'll always do well. I mean, worked in Spain for decades. There's a lot of old field blends in South Africa, and we're planting a lot more these days. Mulching, cover cropping, rolling the cover crops instead of chopping it up to mitigate surface evapotranspiration. Like, maybe again, like the old guys did, plant some windbreaks around it. I don't know. Maybe try and help it that way. I mean, so there's so many things that you can do, but it starts with soil. Well, that's it. If you do not protect the moisture in that soil, you're on the back foot.
Jaco, thank you very much indeed.
Big pleasure.
Really interesting, his emphasis on mulching and cover cropping, essentially focusing on building the carbon content in the soil, which then has the power to sequester and retain moisture through adsorption. Because I think he said at one point that it's much easier to retain water underground, particularly in South Africa, which is not only warm and dry, but also very often windy, which isn't really recognised.
Yeah, and he made a big point that, in South Africa, they've done huge amounts of work and analysis and research and have so much data on the water issue, from both dry farming to irrigated vineyards. They've had it tough, but still make great wine. And he said he's surprised that other winemakers, including the French, don't travel more and build knowledge that way about how to overcome these challenges, or what are increasingly their challenges.
So we all need to head out to South Africa. I'm up for that.
Sure
right. This episode has been a very long one. Shall we wrap things up with a few final thoughts?
Yeah, let's do it. To make wine, we need water. But water is an increasingly precious commodity in today's changing world. And change is the key word here. Make no mistake, the climate is changing, soils are changing, and we have to change with it. We change to remain the same, say Lafleur. The question is, how exactly? Is irrigation the way to go? If so, where will the water come from in a world where humans and food production will always take priority? What are the alternatives? And how should more traditional appellations, like Bordeaux, adapt in the face of such change?
We've covered a lot of ground in this programme, but this is a complex issue, and you get the sense this debate is only just beginning in earnest. And what is the future of wine when it comes to water? As Olivier Tregoat says, we need to open the discussion because, as Omri Ram notes, tomorrow it's going to be too late.
There's clearly a lot that wine can do, from adapting things like planting density, rootstocks training, yields, canopy management, even vine varieties, to mulching, using cover crops and improving soils. Rules and guidelines will need to be modified to allow responsible adaptations. Supervision and controls introduced to police things like water use. Beyond that, doing and sharing research, implementing efficient irrigation systems and installing or upgrading infrastructure to capture and retain rainwater or floodwater, all these are things that clearly are in play. But more needs to be done.
What seems certain is that the global vineyard will inevitably shrink in a world that's drinking less wine and has ever-growing pressures on its freshwater resources. Will this end in wine Armageddon, a vinous doomsday scenario where Great Bordeaux, for example, is a thing of the past?
We have to think positively. After all, the vine, like the human race, is a survivor, able to turn adversity into something comforting and reviving. There is an opportunity here for wine to take a lead in responsible water and soil management, combining human ingenuity and the vine's famous resilience. There may not be one silver bullet, as Jaco Engelbrecht points out, but perhaps through collaboration, innovation, and persistence, wine can get ahead of the game and prove a model of sustainability in a changing world, an inspiration and comfort in troubled times.
Cheers to that. Thanks to our interviewees, Omri Ram, Olivier Tregoat, Cornelis von Leven, and Jaco Engelbrecht. And thanks to you for listening. Until next time, cheers.